A couple of starting points to talk about sustainability in the boardroom. I choose to use the word in the book and in the discussions that I have around the world, sustainability, not ESG, and not because I'm afraid of it or the politicization. It's deeply misunderstood. It started as a narrowly defined set of measurements in financial services and has now been batted about. So I think there's great misunderstanding of actually what it really means, and therefore it misleads what's important around sustainability. Sustainability to me is the umbrella above ESG. And it may be water, it may be healthcare, it may be poverty, it may be supply chains, it may be climate. But I look at it as the 17 SDGs, the development goals. So when I talk about a board's accountability or strategy or approval or insight around sustainability, just bear in mind we're starting with this umbrella of all of the things that are involved. Secondly, we're going to talk about boards, and I spent a lot of time in Europe because those boards are ahead of where we are in the US in terms of how they have compensation and KPIs attached to the performance of the executive teams, how they look at circularity, how they look at supply chains, etc. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about, some of the case studies we're going to talk about, are global in nature de facto. I would say to be in Austin, brings it all home because of the culture of this town, the topography of this county, the mindset of people who choose to live here. And I think you'd be fascinated by, not just because of certain corporate relocations to Austin, Texas, but Europeans are very fascinated by Austin and this ability to be on the global scale now from a corporate and performance standpoint and companies moving here, as well as the kind of soul they perceive of Austin, Texas. So having given this talk in Milan and Zurich and Calgary and other places, you should understand how interested other large corporate centers are with what Austin, Texas is doing or not doing, depending on how you look at it. The other thing I would say is a couple of points as an overview. I look at the boardroom as holding a barbell, holding a bar. And the weights at one end of the bar are institutional investors who say, we will value a more sustainably operating company more highly than not. And they care where their capital is going to work. Put the preaching aside, putting the loudmouths aside, like fundamentally, because they're our clients, they are not buying the stock. At the other end of the bar are consumers who say, I will pay more for a more sustainable product, I will switch categories, and I'll vote with my wallet. Right next to that bar are the employees, particularly younger generations, which you're well aware of, who say, I'll vote with my feet if I don't believe in the company. So the boardroom, which is what we're going to talk about today, says, okay, does management have either the commitment or the understanding? Because a lot of the issues which we'll get to are CEOs making big commitments, and then the C-suite or the operations of the company say, I can't hit that by 2035. Like, great, you said that, but you've committed us to something that we can't achieve. BP says, okay, we're going to have to restate what our goals are so we can achieve them. So I think that nature is changing. So the barbell upon you as governors, not operators, to understand the commitments, understand the strategy, understand the implementation, because you're being held accountable by the consumers and the investors. Okay. The other thing I would say is, well, this discussion is predominantly large cap, upper mid cap, and certainly large cap. And I think Texas knows a lot more about private equity than some other regions of the world. The billions and billions of dollars being put to work around sustainable investments, and we are in the middle of it, our firm, is vastly underestimated. And I can see a moment, because these companies are going to be sold in 3 to 8 years, okay? The cycle of private equity. And they're going to have outsized returns versus the public equities that you hold. And there's going to be a wake-up call. Why do I say that? Because of the 11 largest private equity firms in the world, 9 have recruited heads of sustainability. Not a single press release. Nothing. Crickets, as they say in England. What's their job? Their job is to improve performance, make acquisitions, make integrations, whatever it is, to have higher risk-adjusted returns, which they do over time, than public equities. They're not thumping their chest. They're just going out there and changing the supply chains. They're changing processes. They're hiring leadership. So I would say, and there are a few private equity investors sitting here right now, I would open your ear a little bit more and open your eye a little bit more to some of those funds that you follow or don't or read about to see what they're doing, because they're moving faster than even the fast companies we're going to talk about. And it's billions of dollars, not hundreds of millions. The third point is about what we perceive at Russell Reynolds is the changing nature of leadership, particularly over the last 6 to 8 years. You know, there were a long time ago the kind of superhero CEO, and then the vision thing at the turn of the millennium. But more importantly, is between COVID, Ukraine, inflation, hybrid, is the nature of the leader has changed in terms of more agile leaders, leaders that have more resilience, that, as we all now know, where the business plan approved in October is worthless by February. And so, again, as governors, thinking about how agile, how good a learning, we're going to talk about learning quotient later, how resilient, how persevering the leaders are either running the companies where you're governing, or more importantly, the next generation beneath them, who will really define the company that you're on the board of. With that changing nature of the leader is this concept of a sustainable leader. So, and that nature of that leader has reinvented supply chains, reinvented material sourcing, reinvented circularity, reinvented the uses of water. It's not just about energy and climate and power. Before I get started, you should ask yourself, well, who appointed you the czar of sustainability? You're telling us all this stuff. And I think different people come to this at different times. We talk about in the book that some are born to this. I have one of our 4 children who was born to this and very passionate, and I came to it later in life. I've spent my life on the ocean. I'm an avid sailor, across the Atlantic 7 times, raced tens of thousands of miles around the world, and seen the oceans of the world change. In fact, in 2 of the races we did, we hit whales, one in the middle of the night, one early in the morning, and when a boat stops quickly, having hit a whale, it kind of wakes you up. A little video of what it's like to be crossing the North Atlantic on a sailboat. Here we go. So this is actually the boat one of the boats I was on recently on the transatlantic, sailing through the fog, going extremely fast with a whole lot of bad weather. And having hit 2 whales, you can stay there, Jim. Having hit 2 whales, the most recent trip, which is sadly well documented, so at 9 o'clock in the morning, we've been in fog for 5 days, and visibility is about 100 yards. And all of a sudden I see in front of us, it's a true story, a whale breaching directly in front of the boat. And we're going about 25 miles an hour, super fast. And so I scream whale, and I spin the wheel hard to the right, and the boat kind of goes into literally like a skid, a car skid, going sideways. And it rapidly realized that it wasn't a whale we were seeing, it was a container. It's a true story. We missed it by about 8 or 9 feet.
Wow.
When you almost die, it brings you to a lot of realizations quickly. And if you hit a container, and all the times I've sailed before I met my wife, I said, no fears, we sail, and we train, and we've got great boats, we've got great people. But if you hit a container in the middle of the night, everybody dies. Because the boat goes down in 2 or 3 minutes, because they're made out of carbon fiber. And so at that point I said, and I'd seen all these changes around the ocean in terms of the nature of water, et cetera. I said, what can I do? And by the way, I don't own a recycling company, I don't own waste management, I don't run Exxon, but I'm in the leadership business. So we decided to do a project that we said we're going to look at leadership, and we need leaders to help adjust their sails around sustainability. And we started a project with the UNGC, United Nations Global Compact, which is the 11,000 companies that do the private sector work. And the question was, all these companies that are successful in making profits and operating more sustainably, why are some doing better than others? And as governments retreat at that moment, the private sector, it's probably up to them. So we decided to do a joint venture with the UN, and we agreed upon 55 pioneer CEOs. CEOs from Australia, Singapore, India, America, Brazil, who were most successful operating companies sustainably and making profits and having good returns. And we went out and we interviewed them and we tested them like we interview people to become a CEO of a company. And we compared them in the databases to the leaders we had to see what they had in common, what they had differently, etc. And if you see, when we met a number of directors, you probably can't all see this, 57% of the directors say that economic growth is the top factor for them in the year ahead. 54% of them said investing in sustainability is a way for them to respond to potential downturn or inflation. And 19% of the organizations that were most prepared for headwinds were more likely to have a sustainability plan. So how did we get larger and larger focus on this? We talked about what's the board's role in sustainability. And so I think one of the misnomers is a lot of our clients think I'm going to recruit a sustainable board member, like a digital board member or a cyber board member. We don't believe in single-purpose directors. I doubt you all would either. But the board's educational requirements of understanding the impact on the operations of the company, the commitments of the company, the uses of the resources of the company, both material and substantial, is significant. So when we interviewed the 55 CEOs, we found that they had 4 things that 88% of them spiked on. I mean, unbelievably statistically correct. So I'm going to go through these, and what I want, as I go through them and explain what it means, I also want to say what our clients are looking for should they interview a leader around this framework. So the first is multi-level systems thinking, which is a mouthful, but systems thinking is complexity. Okay? So you've got an already complex operating business, and now you're going to layer on top of it some of these measurements or politics or desires of the employees, the barbell, onto it. And complexity is something you can test for. It's conceptual thinking. And what does it mean? It means that as a leader or a CEO has dramatic numbers of inputs, they are able to decide, the great leaders are, what are the 4, 5, or 6, or 3 that I'm going to focus on and act on? What are the ones I delegate? What are the ones I ignore? Not everyone can do that. And so one of the things we test for around leadership is conceptual thinking, the ability to handle complexity, particularly in a faster moving world. Okay, so first one is complexity. Second is stakeholder inclusion, and it's not inclusion like DE&I. We're saying if you're going to solve a problem, would you include your biggest competitors to solve an industry problem? Pharmaceutical companies in Europe have banded together to focus on water usage in the R&D labs collectively. Okay? Would you bring a regulator into your operations to get something approved faster, like a vaccine? But do you really want the regulator to see the sausage factory, particularly if what you're working on doesn't work out? So the way we look at this is it's very interesting. The same traits were in the digital leaders, and you'll chuckle, but it's dramatically high levels of sociability. not the bar at the back of the room, but the ability for these leaders who spike to work in a room with other people, solicit their best ideas, be decisive, it's sociability and decisiveness, and then bring them along with them to either undertake the transformation, undertake the collaborative issue they're going to have, or get the regulator to buy into what they're doing. So as we look at stakeholder inclusion, it is this ability to influence, win, understand, elicit, and decisiveness, as you might think about this. Third is disruptive innovation. Of course, we talk about innovation. We're in Austin, Texas, where there's a tremendous amount of innovation. But what we look for also in a side innovation is perseverance. You have your own preconceived notions about something you're trying to change, transform, innovate. And what if you're wrong? What if your approach to that product or service or process fails? Can you push beyond it to continue innovating? And not everyone can, not every leader can. And the last is long-term activation. Again, we talk about thinking long-term. What we mean is, around sustainability, some of the biggest issues you're going to face, the success will be when you're no longer the leader or you're no longer on the board. And yet, we know how we look at annual, forget the quarter to quarter, get past that. But we look at annual performance. We typically pay for annual performance. And you look at companies in Denmark, which you may or may not know, almost all the major Danish companies were started as foundations 150, 200 years ago. Like, they're structured forever, okay, literally. And so this ability of a leader to say, I'll do the right thing, even though I may not get the credit for it, is unusual. And so again, this sense of perseverance is unusual. We did this study. We actually presented it in the middle of COVID to the General Assembly of the United Nations. And it landed so well that a lot of boards of directors came back to us, particularly in Europe and Latin America, and said, how do we embed this in our corporate culture? How do we embed this in CEO succession? How do we embed this in the operations of the company? Which made us think a little bit more about writing this book. So we went out, and I went out and interviewed another 42 CEOs from around the world, from Adidas, or say in America, Adidas, to Heineken, to Natura in Brazil, to Mahindra Steel in India, Broad Group in China, and again following these same themes. And the book is not telling you what to do or who's right or wrong. It's a how-to. So we asked all these CEOs, what did you do wrong? What did you do right? What advice would you give to another leader who's taking these on? And then every chapter said, what do we take away from this? So for me, it's really targeted at the CEO and the emerging leader of what do we learn from these people around the world. So we'll give a couple of examples. Lynn Good at Duke Energy, America's largest utility, a great friend and great client of ours, walked into a bit of a mess. You may not remember, but right after she became CEO, a pipe that was 40 years old, it was sealed up in the Dan River, exploded, and all the coal ash went into the Dan River, like 26 million tons. She was brand new in the job. The governor was unimpressed, citizens were unimpressed, and it was brutal for her. At the same time, they were trying to, and they continue to, retire coal plants to put in natural gas, etc. And they go to Asheville, North Carolina, not unlike Austin, Texas. People choose to live there because of the quality of life. And they announced that they're going to go, they think what's a winning idea is they announced they're going to go from coal to a very large gas, and the town goes wild. Not in my backyard. I don't even care if it's cleaner. 25,000 signatures, the governor's up for re-election, he's already mad at the company, the consumers don't want to pay for it, etc. And it becomes a huge operating and strategic issue. What's the lesson for the board here? They take a step back, and they said, back to complexity. And ultimately what they decided to do was bring all the constituents together one by one and collectively. And so they have, in the end, a smaller combined gas facility They went to the tobacco farmers of North Carolina who were going out of business, literally, and said, how'd you like to convert X percentage of your farm into a solar farm? They went to low-income housing and put in special metering to lower the energy costs of those. They went to the high-rises of Asheville and put metering in there for the nights when the lights were all on, et cetera. And created also a nonprofit coalition around what to do, and then added a whole lot of battery storage. So they actually rethought the entire operational approach to it. They brought all the constituents in, and they put up about $120 million from, in essence, an endowment for the community as well to work on things. They turned a disaster into a success, but the complexity of doing that was unbelievable, but very well handled. Maersk Shipping, you see all the containers probably coming through Texas. So Sorenstow is a great and very funny guy, and he was back to this inclusion thing. He said, what if we had, so you all would know from Texas probably that bunker fuel is what every ship and tanker uses in the world, the bottom of the barrel. And they said, we should introduce clean, green engines into all our super tankers. He goes to the industry and said, you don't create value in the engine. We all compete on other things where we create value. We need to come together and commit to building green engines. So they make a $2 billion commitment to supertanker green engines by hydrogen and clean methanol. When they made the commitment to the $2 billion of building the engines, there was enough clean fuel in the world to power those supertankers for a month. And he said, I can't solve everything. He said, if we create a market, they will come together and find a solution, but we have to put a stake in the ground, which is where I come to you all as board members of saying at some point, you have to put a stake in the ground. And lo and behold, guess what? The government of Singapore, the government of Norway, one of the bunkering companies, two of the airlines, all come together, and then now these huge facilities in Oslo and in Singapore that now have developed large supplies of clean fuel. But the point was, he could bring all of his competitors along with him by making a bold move. Two more, and then I'll take questions. Philip Kadri, born in Morocco, in a very poor family, runs Solvay Chemicals, under tremendous pressure all the time just to be in the chemical industry. But a little known fact is there's a commodity plant called guar bean, and all of the clothing that you're wearing will have some element of guar in it. It's an adhesive that's used in making drugs and making textiles, that molecules adhere to each other. Super, super important for efficiency of production. 80% of guar production happens in one state in India called Rajasthan. And it's by about 1,000 different farmers, all of whom are independent, and an unreliable future source of a commodity. So she goes to her biggest competitors and her biggest suppliers and says, why don't we all go to India and create a coalition for these farmers, an education program for these farmers, a higher profitability supply chain for these farmers. By the way, all in the nature of profitability, don't get me wrong, okay? Because we need a predictable, stable supply of guar for as long as we can think about it. So they do that, and they also, so they put apps on the farmers' phones where they think about when it's going to rain, when you pick, when you don't pick, etc. Two sidebars. Many of those farmers are women. And they also provide enough education that they can start their own back gardens, supplying about 250 pounds of vegetables to either sell, to create income for those women aside who don't have a lot of decision making around finance in Indian culture, or for their own families. This becomes an enormous success, and the farmer's profitability goes up something like 700%, and it's more stable supply, etc. So again, we think about different ways that this happens and how it affects the communities. And the last one, and I'll end here. Vitus Avicena ran, just retired, coming on DSM, Dutch state mining company, that he transformed over 14 years into a bulk chemical shipping business, and then as he saw the world changing, into basically went from petrochemicals to biochemicals to biotech, and transform the company. But talking about disruption, he needed to embed in the company the desire for risk and change, because they transformed everything they did over 14 years while growing market cap and growing profitability. And so the culture was typically very risk averse, and they were never going to be able to change anything. So one of the things he did was he said, every time there's a failed launch or a failed product as we transform ourselves, or a failed initiative, everybody who was involved is going to get in the same conference room, and we're going to hold a funeral for the initiative. Why did it die? When did it get sick? What should we have done differently? Because I don't want anyone afraid of trying something new to think they're going to lose because they failed. So infamously, in one of his funerals was a glass coating that they built for consumers that would help the image not get hurt by light as much. Short answer. And it worked well in museums who spent a lot of money, but it's too expensive for the consumer. So they shut it down because they couldn't find a price point. They're holding a funeral, and they're talking about the photons that are being retained. One of the engineers in there, and they said, what did marketing say? Who priced it? How did we engineer it? Where did we get it wrong? Well, this engineer, it's a true story, puts his hand up and goes, hey, we're still trying to figure out our solar panel business. Wouldn't all the nature of these photons work in the solar panel business at scale, et cetera, et cetera? Stop the funeral. Solar panel business is one of the biggest providers. So there are lots of little things beyond science. It is about culture. It is about a willingness to innovate, to change, et cetera, even if they have the funeral. And as he said in the end, there's one more. He talked about spontaneity. A different setting to create serendipity for innovation was critical. There's a great story that Mahindra Steel, Anand Mahindra, who now has probably $1 billion of sustainable businesses aside from the core family steel business, started when an engineer who was going to retire said, before I leave the company, I want to do something I'm proud of. And the three-wheeler taxis, the tuk-tuks, he said, I want to help create a battery-driven, diesel-fuel-driven tuk-tuk before I retire. Will you give me 200,000 rupees or something to do this project? Which he did. Which the success of it doesn't matter. It's when he saw the people in the company reacting to the project that he said, oh my God. He said, never underestimate spontaneity. And so the ability to create energy around these projects, I think, is very important. The last is the path to sustainable progress is not perfection. It's bumpy. It's not popular. It can be ugly. It could be money losing. It could be a funeral. Adidas sneakers. Carson Morscat, who's a good client of ours, a good friend, made a sneaker called the Parley sneaker, which was from recycled ocean plastics for the uppers. They figured out the supply chain, the pricing, the manufacturing, everything else, and they launched the sneaker. Nobody bought it. Mike Miller. Yeah, they produced 2 million. So eventually he goes to the Adidas superstore in the Champs-Élysées in Paris, gets on the stool, trying on people's shoes on a Saturday morning, and he said, do you want to try on the Parley? Say it about them. Nobody ever heard of it. They were so focused on the price point, the engineering, and manufacturing, they hadn't launched their marketing properly. So he goes back to the drawing board. They end up, they get away from ocean plastics, and they double down in 2019 to 9 out of 10 of their new product launches would have recycled materials, not ocean plastics, which was too complicated, but uppers or laces or other things. It'd still be a performance even. Now, what do you think the largest market for sneakers is in the world? China. China carries a recycled sneaker. Yeah. Adidas missed their numbers, blew it, plus they killed it. He got fired. So on Scal, his board doubled down on it when he took the risk. Adidas fired. Nobody says this is easy. Nor are we going to tell you that all the stories of
rainbows and trout, okay? Because they're not. It's a path to progress, not perfection. But I think there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of incredibly successful, profitable, sustainable retailers, which need tens of thousands. And that's what this is all about. Thank you very much.